Hello again, my name is Steven again, and this is part 2 of NASCAR Know-It-All about Richmond International Raceway. I left you talking about the 2003 season. Now we'll talk about the 2004 season. The 2004 season started with Brian Vickers winning the pole, driving the same car and team that Joe Nemechek had dominated with the previous season. Would the 2003 NASCAR Busch Series champion pick up his first career win? It was definitely looking that way, but in the race his car was not as strong as what people thought. And this race saw a magnitude of different leaders, but in the end, it came down to two Chevrolet heavyweights: Jimmie Johnson, who looked to be en route to his first career win at Richmond, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. In the end, Jr. would pass Johnson after the last restart. Jr. would pick up his third career victory of what would become a six-win season, leading to a fifth-place finish in the point standings that season. Statistically, Jr.'s best career season. But could he top that this year, having already won three times, and he has a chance to be the number one seed next weekend in Chicago? Only time will tell. In the fall that year, 2004, this was the first year of the chase, where 10 drivers, or any driver within 400 points of the points leader, would move on and participate in the run for the championship. But the chase, I'm not going to talk about this. This will be in our next episode. The race came down to multiple drivers. But what most people remember, a wreck caused by Casey Mears that involved Jimmie Johnson, the points leader, and Mark Martin, who was right on the edge of making it in the chase. Martin managed to escape with little contact and damage. He'd come back to finish fourth, but Johnson's night was done. In the end, Kurt Busch looked like he'd finally end his Richmond bad luck. Not to be. He'd run out of gas with 9 laps to go, handing the lead over to Jeremy Mayfield. Mayfield hadn't won in 4 years, but he picked the perfect time. Winning that race vaulted him from 14th to 9th in the to 10th in the championship point standings, thus making it into the championship chase playoffs. Mayfield won some strange races in his career. He won his first career race at Pocono in '98 after several rain delays. His next win was at Fontana in 2000. His engine temperature and oil temperature was so hot, many people wonder how his engine even made it. Later that season at Pocono, he won a race by moving Dale Earnhardt out of the way in turn 3. That's right, Dale Earnhardt. Talk about a man that's not afraid of anything. He also won a race in 2005 at Michigan that was on fuel mileage. With 10 laps to go, everyone pitted as Mayfield ran 19th, but Mayfield stayed out under green, kept the lead. His team pitted there, and his team tested there, as his crew chief slugger, Richard Slugger Labbe, said they were going to be ready. As it turns out, their car wasn't very good, but they ran 52 laps on gas. That was more than anyone else. In 2005, the Roush Fenway cars were the dominant forces at the Richmond or in NASCAR, especially on the mile-and-a-half racetracks. But they weren't finding that success on the short tracks. At Richmond, the only Roush car to be strong was Kurt Busch. But Kurt was really showing that he was going to be a flat track genius. In the race, Kasey Kahne, Kurt Busch, and Tony Stewart exchanged the lead. But Kasey Kahne would pick up his first career NASCAR Sprint Cup Series, at that time Nextel Cup Series victory. Many people thought his first win would come on an intermediate track, not so much a short track. But I actually was at a race Kasey won at Bristol in 2013, so he is pretty decent on the short tracks. Later that year in the fall, the Roush Fenway dominance finally came to fruition on a short track. Kurt Busch passed Matt Kenseth with late in the going, making it a Roush Fenway 1-2-3 actually. Not only did Kenseth hang on to finish second, but Greg Biffle beat Kyle Busch in a photo finish to finish third. The 2006 season saw several drivers come into this race as a favorite. Kevin Harvick had recently won at Phoenix, the most similar setup. Greg Biffle and Mark Martin actually led the most laps in those two races, but they lost on fuel mileage. And wouldn't you know it, all three of them qualified in the top 4 positions. They were the best cars in the race, particularly Harvick, but on the final caution, Harvick didn't pit. He stayed out. Martin pitted a lap too early when pit road was closed, and Biffle got a speeding penalty in the race. All of them had problems opening the door for Denny Hamlin. Hamlin looked en route to his first career victory at his home track in his rookie year. Even though Hamlin got by Harvick, he would soon lose the lead to Dale Earnhardt Jr., who would pick up his third and so far last victory at the Richmond International Raceway. In 2006 in the fall, several drivers near the end were just cruising around, such as Mark Martin and Jeff Burton, to clinch their spots in the chase. But that being said, there was an exciting race on the line for the win, and to gain that momentum to say, I'm the last winner before the chase started. Kyle Busch looked to be on his way to his first career victory at Richmond. But in the closing laps, Kevin Harvick, Mr. Where Did He Come From, did it again. He closed in on Kyle Busch in the last few laps, and he actually pulled up alongside of him coming to the white flag. He would clear him on the backstretch on the final lap, going on to win for the first time at the Richmond International Raceway. In 2007, the series came to Richmond with the COT car. The race was actually rain delayed and ran the next day in the daylight. I remember this race well because Greg Biffle, whose number you see in the background, ran phenomenal. He started 38th, but he drove all the way to the lead within the last 100 laps. Unfortunately, Biffle would get in a wreck caused by David Rudiman, handing the lead in the win to Jimmy Johnson. Later that season in 2008, we saw a new driver emerge at Richmond. I'm sorry, we're in the year 2007, aren't we? That's right. It looked like Carl Edwards, who was recently coming off a victory at Bristol, would pick up the win here at Richmond this night. Already basically being a block for the chase, it didn't matter what happened. As it turns out, Edwards would have an engine failure late in the race, giving the lead to Jimmy Johnson. He would sweep at Richmond, as he would be on his way to his second career championship. In 2008, the series came to Richmond. This race looked a little bit on the exciting side. We saw multiple things in this race. A lot of people weren't really sure who to pick a favorite for in this race, but as we all know, the favorite is going to come out eventually. Many people probably would have pointed at Jimmy Johnson to be the favorite in this race. That's who I probably would have pointed at, but as it turned out, Johnson did not win this race, but Johnson did actually win in the fall, a race in which Tony Stewart looked to be very strong. Tony Stewart led late in the race, but unfortunately a late race slow pit stop would cost him the lead, giving way to Jimmy Johnson. Johnson would hold off Stewart to win, but most people forget David Rudiman actually led the most laps in this race, the first time that it ever happened. Although I think I forgot to tell you who won 2008 in the spring, so I'll mention that now. Denny Hamlin looked en route to winning the race. He led 381 laps, but near the end of the race, Kyle Busch managed to get by him as well as Dale Earnhardt Jr., because Denny Hamlin had a flat tire. But Jr. managed to get the lead because Kyle Busch slowed down a little bit for Hamlin. In the last 3 laps, Jr. and Kyle Busch made contact, giving way to Emporia, Kansas' Clint Bowyer. That was awesome, Clint Bowyer responded, as he went on to win. As Jr. said, though, afterwards, Kyle Busch was going to need security to get out of Richmond that night. In 2009, the series came to Richmond. Many people thought the 50-year-old Mark the Kid Martin would be the guy to beat. He recently won at Phoenix, a very similar setup racetrack, and in the race, he was very stout. But he would get in an accident with Ryan Newman with 80 laps to go, forcing him back to the 26th position. He would charge back to 4th, but Kyle Busch would win the race on tire strategy, kicking off 4 consecutive spring races he would win: 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. At one point, it seemed like he was never going to lose at Richmond. But he wasn't winning in the fall. In 2009, in the fall, Denny Hamlin won the race, holding off Kurt Busch and beating Mark Martin's pit crew off the pit stop for the final stop of the race with 11 laps to go. Hamlin would also win in the fall of 2010, holding off Kyle Busch, who at this point was asserting himself as the driver to beat at Richmond. Kyle Busch said afterwards his brakes were not working that well that night. I guess no one else will ever know. The 2011 race, in my opinion, was the title-changing race. Carl Edwards lost the 2011 championship by a tiebreaker to Tony Stewart, but this was the race that got away. Edwards won 1 race in 2011, but had he won 1 more, he would have been champion. In this particular race, Edwards' car was stellar. There was no way that Kellogg's Cornflakes Ford Fusion would lose. But on the last pit stop, much like 2006, everyone pitted but Carl Edwards. In 2006, Harvick was bitten by that, but not in 2011. He'd come through and win the Perfect Pistachios 400. The 2012 fall race. Ooh, another exciting one. Of course, in my opinion, every NASCAR race is exciting. But this particular race was another one that started the chase. And in this particular race, there were multiple rain delays. But in the end, Mark Martin and Jeff Gordon looked to have the 2 best cars. But Clint Bowyer was trying to win it on fuel mileage. Martin and Gordon actually pitted with 40 laps to go, and they came out 1.5 laps behind Clint Bowyer. Believe it or not, both of them ran down Clint Bowyer and almost passed him on the last lap. But Bowyer held on and won for the second time in what would become a 3-win season and a runner-up finish in the championship points. In 2013, the series came back to Richmond, and in the spring, Kyle Busch would finally lose. I know, unbelievable. The race ended with multiple cautions. The final one came out with 4 laps to go when one Pablo Montoya was leading, looking to finally win on an oval. But believe it or not, several cars stayed out. Montoya came out in 6th, but he was on the dreaded outside lane, which is a disadvantage at Richmond. Harvick came out 7th, the first with 4 fresh tires. It turned out to be a huge advantage. Mr. Where Did He Come From ended up being in the lead by the time they got to turn 3 of that lap. Montoya actually got stuck behind A.J. Allmendinger. 2013 in the fall, this was another chase-deciding race, and it was looking semi-exciting. Of course, like I say, every race is exciting. Ryan Newman looked to be en route to victory, but a caution with a few laps to go, thanks to an itchy thumb by Clint Bowyer, led to a late race caution, pit stops, and a restart. Carl Edwards would go on to win the race, but most people remember this for Clint Bowyer spinning out and the chase altercations that it had. But again, we'll talk about chase things in another episode. The spring race this year was one of the most bizarre finishes ever at Richmond. The race came down to Matt Kenseth, Brad Keselowski, and Jeff Gordon, all NASCAR champions. Unfortunately, they couldn't play nice. Keselowski was not very happy that Matt Kenseth was not letting him get by, but Kenseth never made contact with Keselowski, but Keselowski apparently didn't care. He kept hitting Kenseth, until eventually it slowed all 3 of their progress, and Joey Logano from Connecticut was in perfect position from 4th to escape and get by all of them to win the race. So now you have it. You've heard all the different winners at Richmond and what happened since 2000. So who is my favorite to win tonight? Or on Saturday night, Matt Kenseth. He's due at Richmond. He's had so much bad luck there lately. I think Saturday night will be the night that it all ends for him and he picks up the win. Well, thank you for watching NASCAR Know It All with Steve. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Have a great night.